The ticket they stole. On the day the money vanished, the air in the warehouse smelled like wet gypsum and old coffee. Evan Rios stood in an office whose walls were the color of nicotine, watching his boss sign a piece of paper that turned 5 years of Evan's life into a smudge. "Don't take it personal," said Leonard Pike, the man whose name was on the corrugated boxes stacked in the dark. "Business is tides. Sometimes the tide goes out." Evan's savings, overtime hours, foregone weekends, holidays his mother had begged him to claim, sat in a profit-sharing plan that existed, he now learned, in a file cabinet, not a bank. The plan's custodian had a last name that matched the letters stitched on Leonard's golf bag. The signatures looked like cousins. "It was my money," Evan said. "It was the company's money set aside for your benefit," Leonard corrected, a teacher depositing chalk dust into a lesson about capitalism. Evan left with a letter that pretended to commiserate. He found out later that 2 other foremen had signed NDAs and took pennies to keep quiet. He didn't sign. He was 29 and poor and angrier than a lit match walking into a barn. When he threatened to go to the state, Leonard's cousin, Camden Lafton, CFO, told him they'd sue him for defamation. The message was clear. The tide didn't care if you learned how to swim. Time does a trick where rage calcifies into something studyable. Evan studied. He learned that people like Leonard trusted glass more than steel. They loved to see themselves reflected. They never looked behind. Years later, when the numbers came up, he remembered the smell of gypsum and old coffee, and he smiled in a way that could be misread as joy. It was not joy. It was the sound a match makes in a very dry place. The convenience store at the corner of Valley and Cross was the kind of place where the cooler hummed louder than the patrons. A bell chimed when you pushed the door open, as if shaming you for needing milk after midnight. Evan came for milk, left with a ticket. The milk soured. The ticket didn't. "Power pick or quick 5?" asked the clerk, a woman whose eyebrows seemed to have their own weather. "Power pick," he said, "whatever's cheapest." "Nothing about this is cheap," she said, palming the machine. "You want to pick numbers or let the house decide your fate?" "House can decide," he said, digging under lint for his last $6. He lived 3 blocks away in an apartment that made him taller than his ceiling fan if he wore boots. He worked at a steel fabrication shop that smelled like rain on a train track. He took fill-in shifts as a night custodian at the community college. He owed no one and everyone. His mother's medical debt ran like an underground river through every decision he made. The clerk slid the ticket across the counter and said, "Don't forget, this is just paper until it's not." "Everything's just paper until it's not," Evan said, and tucked it behind the picture of his mother in his wallet. She'd died 2 years back, and some days the grief was a boulder, other days it was dust. Tonight it was a silhouette in his kitchen window where he imagined her stirring caldo and scolding him for showing up with milk and no bread. He didn't watch the drawing. He fell asleep on the couch with the TV murmuring an advertisement for an injury lawyer who wore a cape in the commercial. When he woke before dawn to dress for the shop, he checked the ticket, because that's what you do, so you can throw it away and get on with the day. The numbers lined up, neat as teeth. He blinked, checked again, and then once more, because repetition is the only religion poor people can afford. He didn't shout, he didn't dance. He sat on the edge of the coffee table and listened to the building yawn, pipes knocking, an upstairs neighbor's shower sputtering, a stray dog singing to nothing. It wasn't joy. It was a ledger finally agreeing he existed. He folded the ticket and put it back behind his mother's photo, as if she'd been keeping it safe all along. Then he went to work. "Quit," said Jules, leaning against a stack of steel bar as if it were a chaise lounge. Jules had worked with Evan for 4 years and had a way of making a cigarette look philosophical, even when it was unlit. "I can't just vanish," Evan said. "You can if you vanish with a plan," Jules said. "Tell me you have one." At lunch, Evan let Jules see the ticket. Not hold it, see it, like people are allowed to look at babies through nursery glass. "You gotta sign it," Jules whispered as if the ticket could hear. "Not yet," Evan said. First, I find a lawyer and a financial person who isn't a cousin and a mask. Anonymity, Evan said. I want to win and not be found. You're brown in a neighborhood that keeps inventory, Jules said. Everyone will know. Then I'll speak a language they don't understand, Evan said, and spent the afternoon welding a rail that would anchor a stair that would carry someone else upstairs. The lawyer wore a suit the color of unemployment and seemed to enjoy scaring him. You'll get calls from people you haven't met yet who will insist they used to babysit you, she said. You'll get calls from churches who consider your redemption their jurisdiction. You'll get letters shaped like emergencies. The state will ask to put you on a dais and hand you a billboard-sized check. You will say no. I will say no, Evan echoed. You will create a trust, the lawyer continued. You will become a trustee with a name that isn't yours, an entity with a filing code and an address in Wyoming where the mail goes to die. You will direct a certified financial planner to invest like you plan to live past 70. You will give your job 2 weeks and keep your mouth closed like it's winter and your breath is evidence. Do you understand? He understood enough to nod. What's the trust called? She asked, pen poised. He thought of Leonard's office, the gypsum dust, the name on the boxes. He thought of tides. He thought of the alley behind his building where the kids chalked constellations on the asphalt. Quarry Street Foundation, he said. Quarry Street didn't exist. It was what they called the path that cut behind the old factory, a shortcut to nowhere that still felt like leaving. Congratulations, Mr. Quarry, the lawyer said dryly. He signed with a hand that felt like a borrowed instrument. The state announced that a winning ticket had been sold at the corner of Valley and Cross. The clerk on TV said she didn't know who it was but hoped they were honest. The camera loved her eyebrows. Evan went to work the next day and the next. He told the shop he'd be leaving in 2 weeks for family reasons. Jules shook his hand and did not squeeze, as if the bones might rearrange themselves around the new reality. At home, Evan put the ticket in a fireproof envelope and the envelope in a safe he'd bolted to the floor, then fell asleep on top of the safe like a dragon who hadn't learned how to be a dragon yet. It's a dangerous thing to hold a fortune and a grievance at the same time. One amplifies the other like a feedback loop. Evan knew this, which is why he made 2 lists. The first list was called Light. It had names and places that meant warmth. The community college where night custodians kept city dreams clean. Mrs. Ortiz, who ran the neighborhood food pantry out of a church basement and made caldo that could cure minor betrayals. The library where he'd hidden from the heat as a kid. The Light list was a promise that he would not let money make his memory small. The second list was called Glass. He wrote Pike and Sons Construction first, then crossed out sons because there weren't any, only cousins. He wrote Camden Lafton, CFO. He wrote Reese Garner, a city councilman who accepted campaign checks the same day Pike projects cleared permits. He added QuickFin, a payday lender that had opened 3 branches within walking distance of Pike job sites. There were others, a boutique law firm that specialized in turning wage theft into misunderstanding, a property manager who counted mold as a roommate when calculating rent. The Glass list wasn't a promise, it was a curriculum. He spent a week learning. Public filings are stories with all the verbs removed. He read them anyway, tracing ownership chains that wandered like gossip. Quarry Street hired a private investigative firm with a boring name and excellent grammar. They delivered reports with bullet points that might as well have been fireworks. He learned that Pike & Sons had funneled company cash through a third-party vendor, Harborline Solutions LLC, which billed consulting services at an hourly rate higher than most doctors. Harborline's address matched a mailbox store near a golf course. Harborline loaned money to Lofton Property Ventures, which rented machines to Pike & Sons at above-market flat rates. The profits wended their way into a pack that polished the councilman's teeth in his re-election mailers. It wasn't criminal, not outright. It was the shape of a culture that believed the poor were bad at math. Evan went on walks in the evening, charting routes that passed vacant lots that could be gardens, schools with busted HVACs, and a senior center whose elevator had been broken for months. He didn't fantasize about car chases or confrontations. He imagined ribbon cuttings, where certain men would be invited, and certain men would discover the ribbon had been cut without them. A plan began to gather itself like weather. He didn't start with Pike, he started with oxygen. Mrs. Ortiz's pantry served 300 families a week from a tiled basement that also flooded whenever the church forgot to maintain the gutter. The line wrapped around the block on Saturdays. The volunteers rotated knees like professional athletes. Evan, as the Quarry Street Foundation's program officer, called Mrs. Ortiz from a number with a Wyoming area code and asked if he could drop by. She met him at a folding table sticky with juice boxes. She was short and dense with competence, and she cut through pleasantries like they were plastic ties. "If you're selling something, sell it at the mall," she said. "If you're giving something, show me the receipt." "I'm here to fund a building you own," he said. "No rent, and a box truck, and a salary for you with actual benefits. We'll call it a pilot and pretend we're going to study the outcomes. We're not. We're going to feed more people with less drama." "Who are you?" she asked. "Quarry Street Foundation," he said. "Who are you?" she asked again, softer. "A donor," he said. "With a rule, you never say my name." "I don't know your name," she said. "Good," he said, and showed her a one-page grant agreement that was shorter than the soup recipes taped to her fridge. "Blessings don't usually come with teeth," she said, reading. "They should," he said. "This one does. You'll also host quarterly financial literacy workshops taught by actual certified folks. We'll pay them, and you'll refer everyone who asks about small short-term loans to the credit union instead of QuickFin. We're seeding a community lending circle there, with rates under 7%. The credit union will hate the paperwork. We'll buy them more clerks." "You're trying to starve QuickFin," she said, eyes narrowing. "I'm trying to feed people without letting wolves sell the forks," he said. Mrs. Ortiz smiled like someone who had prayed for a long time and now felt a draft. "We'll need a name," she said, "for the building." "The pantry already has a name," he said. "I mean for the sign in front," she said. "Donors like names." "No names," he said, "not mine." "Good," she said. "Then we'll name it for my mother." He left with a bag of tangerines and a to-do list that included permits and contractors and a lawyer to read the bylaws of the church corporation because nothing is simple that involves a parking lot. He called Jules and asked if he wanted to supervise a build-out at double his hourly rate with benefits and a bonus that could pay for nursing school for Jules's wife. "Who are you now?" Jules asked. "I'm the same," Evan said, just with sharper pencils. They signed papers. The box truck came in blue. The credit union moaned and then learned how to moan with efficiency. QuickFin's manager posted a sign reminding borrowers of their relationship. The sign looked like a hostage note. 2 blocks away, at a dedication where Mrs. Ortiz cried and the tangerines tasted like sunlight, a man in a crisp suit took pictures and looked annoyed by his own shadow. Councilman Reese Garner. He'd come expecting to cut a ribbon. He found a community handing scissors to one another. There were no podiums. There were no microphones. When he tried to speak, Mrs. Ortiz pressed a plastic cup of lemonade into his hand and told him he was blocking the line. Later, his office issued a press release calling the pantry's expansion a step forward in a partnership between public servants and private citizens. They capitalized public servants. Quarry Street was not mentioned. That evening, QuickFin's lights burned past midnight. In the morning, 2 men in shirt sleeves carried out a printer and an optimism that didn't fit in the doorway. Evan stood across the street and didn't smile. He watched for tides and felt only wind. Attack a system and it notices, not first, not at once, but it notices. The first notice was a letter addressed to Quarry Street Foundation, care of a registered agent in Cheyenne, asking for a meeting with Councilman Garner to explore synergies. It said synergy 3 times and community once. Evan ignored it. The second notice was a phone call to Mrs. Ortiz from a man who introduced himself as a friend of friends, offering cooperation in the form of referrals. She hung up and texted Evan a single word, wolves. The third notice was a check delivered to the credit union from Harborline Solutions LLC, the mailbox that wore a suit. It was for $25,000, memo line, community commitment, a Band-Aid where a policy should be. The credit union director, a woman who kept her hair in a bun shaped like a gavel, called Evan. "What do we do with this?" she asked. "Cash it," Evan said, "then use it to hire a clerk to process our lending circle paperwork faster. If they ask for a photo, point them to a printing shop." "You're not subtle," she said. "I'm trying not to be loud," he said. At night, he built the other half of the plan. He hired a forensic accountant named Shashi, whose Google reviews all mentioned the word relentless. Shashi found angles even Evan hadn't imagined: a lapsed safety certification at a Pike job site that could trigger fines, a subcontractor with a workers' comp policy that was a fiction, a pattern of temporary layoffs that coincided with union organizing meetings. "Do you want to go to the state?" Shashi asked. "Yes," Evan said, "but not as Quarry Street, not yet." "So as who?" Shashi asked. "As a community," Evan said, with another mask. They built a coalition with people who had scars where wages should have been. They trained them to testify. They paid for childcare and bus passes. They persuaded a legal aid office to file a class action that would pull Pike's misunderstandings into sunlight. The press sniffed a story that smelled like oil and blood. That's when Evan realized he needed a person who could face microphones. Her name was Maya Chen, and she'd been showing up to city meetings for the last 5 years with a tripod and a camera that had seen things. She ran an online outlet called Blocks and Bridges. Her audience was small and loyal and had a talent for salt in comment sections. Evan met her at a coffee shop that specialized in being earnest. "You're Quarry Street," she said, looking at him over a cup that had a reward program. "I'm a program officer," he said. "You don't look like a program officer," she said. "What does a program officer look like?" he asked. "Like someone who wears jackets that make conference badges look natural," she said. "You look like a welder on a day off." "I was," he said, "before I became a mask." "Why me?" Maya asked. "Because you don't like being fed press releases," he said, "and because if this ever touches a big paper, they'll let it die gently in Metro briefs. I need it to live loudly in places that actually bleed." "What's the story?" she asked. "Wage theft with a family crest," he said. "Payday loans designed to function like handcuffs, a councilman who thinks ribbon cuttings are sacraments, and a set of people who are tired." Maya pressed record on a device he hadn't seen leave her bag. "Say that again," she said. He did, and in the same breath realized he had made a choice he could not unchoose. He had let someone see his face. Leonard Pike loved his name the way some men love a view. He believed it ennobled whoever stood near it. He wore his initials on his cufflinks, and his regret in public only when the cameras were on. He liked to walk job sites in crisp shirts that made dust consider itself common. He shook hands like a man sealing a vault. When Blocks and Bridges published a piece titled "The Quiet Theft: How a Construction Company Built an Empire on Unpaid Wages," Leonard called it garbage in a statement that used words like baseless and agenda. The statement misspelled Maya's last name. The misspelling became a t-shirt in the Blocks and Bridges store by sunset. 3 former Pike foremen came forward, then 8, then 15, then a number that made the legal aid office increase their coffee budget. A city inspector retired early. A week later, a photo circulated of Councilman Garner on a boat owned by a subcontractor with a fondness for envelopes. Leonard went on radio to say the city needed jobs more than it needed complainers. He announced a donation to the Police Benevolent Fund. He smiled like a deck of cards. Evan watched from his couch, the safe still under the bed, because he couldn't think of a better place to put it. "What's your end game?" Maya asked him over the phone. "End games are for people who move pieces," he said. "I'm building a table." "Tables can get flipped," she said. "Then we bolt it to the floor," he said. "You're mixing metaphors like salsa," she said. "I like it." He didn't tell her about the other part, the part that was more precise than metaphors. He had pulled permits for a training center, welding, HVAC, electrical, tuition-free with stipends for trainees. It would be open to anyone, but they would recruit hard among workers who'd been blacklisted for asking for oxygen. They'd staff it with journeymen who wanted to teach. They'd make a deal with the union that if and when a worker graduated, their hours would count toward apprenticeship. He'd place the center 4 blocks from Pike's flagship office. It wasn't just revenge, it was an alternate physics. At the dedication, he would invite no officials. He would name it for something that couldn't be bought. He called Jules. "How do you feel about being a foreman again?" he asked, "on a project that doesn't insult the idea of a paycheck?" "I feel like my knees were waiting for you to ask," Jules said. "You cannot dismantle a man's reflection without being invited to dinner at least once." The invitation came via a charity gala with a name so aspirational it could have been a yoga pose. The Urban Renewal Initiative, a coalition of real estate developers who considered their patience with tenants a civic duty, invited Quarry Street Foundation to sponsor a table. The cheapest sponsorship cost 6 figures. The money would support entrepreneurial scholarships, which translated in their dialect to seed money for people we already like. Evan bought a table. Maya told him he was insane. "You're paying for them to clap at themselves," she said. "I'm paying for a microphone," he said, "and a room where certain ears are believing themselves invincible." "Will you speak?" she asked. "I'll let someone else speak," he said. He asked Mrs. Ortiz to come and bring 2 volunteers and wear whatever made them laugh. He asked the credit union director to come and practice an acceptance face. He asked a man named Luis, who'd been fired from Pike for attitude after he alerted OSHA to a trench without shoring. Luis had a scar along his calf where dirt had tried to become his roommate. When they walked into the ballroom, developers' wives looked at their shoes. Men who negotiated with smiles glanced towards name tags that said Quarry Street Foundation and wondered if they were supposed to recognize the brand. The MC called donors visionary. The salads arrived as if lettuce had won a prize. Councilman Garner practiced a face in a side mirror and found he had 2. When it was Quarry Street's turn to say a few words, Evan stayed seated and watched as Mrs. Ortiz approached the podium with a calm that made people lower their forks. She didn't thank anyone. She told a story about a boy who grew up on her block, who was good with his hands, who fixed AC units with borrowed tools and dignity, who fell into a pit of debt and kept climbing out, who finally found work at a shop that treated him like a replaceable part, who then found a place with a name you couldn't put on a sign because it belonged only to the people it fed. "Blessings should have teeth," she said into the microphone, and the room didn't know whether to laugh or take notes. Luis spoke next. He didn't rehearse. He said, "I dig so other people don't fall. When they made me dig without walls, I called a number. Then they made the walls out of paperwork." The credit union director said that interest could be a math problem or a morality play, depending on who wrote the equation. The room shifted, almost imperceptibly, like a tall building in wind. Leonard Pike raised a glass and smiled with all his teeth. It looked like a man who saw his reflection in the curve of a spoon and believed it still flattering. After dessert, he sauntered to the Quarry Street table. "I like what you've done with your money," he said to Evan, eyes skating over him and then back. "Feeding people is always a solid PR move." Evan felt the old heat, the gypsum dust in his lungs, the way Leonard's office had turned his rage into a lesson. "Sometimes it's not PR," Evan said. "Sometimes it's dessert." "Meaning?" Leonard asked, amused. "Meaning the main course is coming," Evan said, and took a sip of water. Leonard's eyes sharpened, then softened. He clapped Evan on the shoulder like a priest ready to forgive. "If you ever want to invest in real construction," he said, "call me. We can show you how to make your dollar work like a teamster." "Your dollar's been working double shifts," Evan said. "It's tired." Leonard laughed. "Everyone's tired," he said, and walked away. Maya leaned in. "You realize you just told him you're coming," she whispered. "I told him dessert tastes better when you don't know what's in it," Evan said. "Are you a poet or a fire hazard?" she asked. "Both," he said. He watched Leonard cross the room like a man inspecting a floor he owned. He watched the councilman attach himself to that gravity. He watched the wives of developers rearrange their necklaces, the way people do when they suspect there are fewer chairs than players. He felt no joy, he felt a mathematics he could finally do. They named the training center the Anchor because Jules said every ship needs something that touches bottom and refuses to move. The sign was just painted letters on corrugated steel, stubborn and clean. Inside, there were 6 welding bays, a classroom with tables donated by a shuttered charter school, a coffee station with a jar labeled Maya's Fuel Fund, and an office Evan refused to use unless he had to. Recruitment wasn't hard. Word travels faster than mail when men are between paychecks. Luis brought 2 guys from his old trench crew. A woman named Naya, who could outlift most of them, signed up after Pike's foreman told her, "Site work isn't for girls." A laid-off HVAC tech named Damien wanted to re-up his certs. A kid just out of high school wanted to learn anything that made sparks. They came for skills. Evan planned to send them home with something longer than that. "Stipends hit Fridays," he said on orientation day. "Attendance matters. You'll pass OSHA 10 by the end of the month. We'll line up mock interviews with union reps and actual GCs who pay real. We don't teach shortcuts. We don't cheat on safety. And if any of you are here because you've been told there's a blacklist, there is, and it's shrinking." He watched their faces. Hope has a way of flinching before it takes up space. He loved the moment it forgot to flinch. An inspector arrived the second week, the kind who carried a clipboard like a baton. He introduced himself as from the city, which covered a lot of sins. "We had 3 other inspectors already," Jules said, all politeness and torque. "This one is a follow-up," Clipboard said. "From who?" Jules asked. Clipboard glanced at the welding bays. "We'll need to shut those down for a noise assessment." Jules smiled without humor. "In a welding shop." Evan stepped in. "Of course," he said. "While your meter warms up, can I show you our signed permits, the fire marshal's sign-off, and the decibel readings from the manufacturer spec sheet? These are our ear protection logs. We do fit tests on Wednesdays. Here's a photo of Councilman Garner touring a Pike site last month where I count 2 men in a trench with no shoring. Do you need that for your follow-up list?" Clipboard's expression went through 3 weather systems. "This is routine," he said. "Then you'll love routine," Evan said, and handed him a thick folder with tabs. When the inspector left, Maya was leaning against the doorway, a camera hanging at her hip like punctuation. "Who do you think sent him?" she asked. "I don't think," Evan said. "I add." "Put that on a t-shirt," she said. They didn't throw a ribbon cutting. They held a cookout and a practical demonstration where Naya stitched 2 plates together cleaner than a sewing machine. Mrs. Ortiz brought beans and a seriousness that made people pick up litter automatically. The credit union set up a table and got 20 new members before the sparklers went out. Across the boulevard, a Pike project manager leaned on a pickup and watched. When he made eye contact with Evan, he smiled the way men smile when they're certain the tide only moves one way. "Bolted to the floor," Jules murmured. "We just did," Evan said. Shashi liked to bring him documents the way a magician brings rabbits, with flourish and a little shame at how easy the trick was. "Look at this," she said, dropping a manila envelope on the metal desk in the anchor's office. "Pike's downtown tower, their crane operator's certification lapsed. For 3 weeks. Guess who kept pouring?" Evan flipped through copies of logs, sign-ins, and a screenshot of a text that read, "He's fine, schedule can't move." "OSHA," he asked. "Already flagged, but there's more," Shashi said, tapping the stack. "They've been self-certifying dust control compliance on a site that generates a small desert every afternoon. I found 3 asthma complaints within 2 blocks." "Neighbors?" Evan asked. "Grandmother," Shashi said, "with grandkids." Maya ran the story with photos of suspended fines appended like ornaments. Halt notice issued after certification lapse. Residents cough while councilman poses. Her lead was a sentence short enough to fit on a sticker. If it were their lungs, would they rush the pour? The next morning, A red banner went up around the tower site. Work slowed to a sullen shuffle. A radio show host asked whether the city was being too hard on job creators. Maya pulled the payroll receipts from the lawsuit and asked how many jobs a withheld paycheck created. Councilman Garner held a press conference by a playground with fresh paint. Behind him, a kid on a swing shouted higher like a prayer. Garner said, "We can both enforce safety and build a city that works." He said both again, longer this time, like stretching a bridge across a river that wasn't there. He didn't take questions. He did, however, send a letter to the anchor requesting a tour and listening session featuring industry stakeholders. It read like an invitation to be colonized. Evan wrote back, "Happy to host a skills demonstration for prospective employers. Listening session closed to elected officials." Garner's chief of staff replied with a reminder that taxpayer dollars support workforce initiatives. The anchor was privately funded. Evan sent back a scanned check from Quarry Street to the city for the use of a vacant lot they'd transformed into a tool yard. "We appreciate taxpayers," he wrote. "We are some." "I keep waiting for you to flinch," Maya said, recording a segment in the shop while Naya taught a first pass. "Flinching is expensive," Evan said. "Not flinching can get you sued," she said. He looked at the stack of envelopes on his desk, most of them legal. "That's on part 10, he said. The email arrived from Camden Lafton himself, though it was clearly written by someone with better spelling. "We at Harborline Solutions have watched your foundation's efforts with admiration." He suggested a partnership between Harborline and Quarry Street to provide financial education and microbridge liquidity to workers in training. Attached was a glossy PDF featuring smiling faces and the phrase, "on your side," so often it started sounding like a warning. Maya read it over Evan's shoulder and made a face like she'd bitten a lemon and discovered it had bones. "He just offered to put handcuffs on your students," she said. "Only the pretty ones," Evan said. He wrote back, "Before we consider any partnership, please send audited financials for Harborline Solutions and any affiliated entities for the last 5 years, including but not limited to lists of beneficial owners, fee schedules, and default rate triggers. We require partners to conform to APR caps and to prohibit rollovers. Also attach a photo of your mailbox." 3 hours later, a reply, "We'll get back to you." They did, with a different tactic. A woman with a speakerphone voice called Mrs. Ortiz offering to sponsor the pantry's new box truck in exchange for brand placement. Mrs. Ortiz told her the truck already had a brand, food. Next, they tried church elders from 3 denominations, offering grants to youth programs if someone could facilitate a constructive meeting. Harborline was seeding niceness like dandelions. Evan answered each with the same ask: auditeds, owners, APR caps. Shashi, relentless as ever, found their tax filings. They were thin and defensive. Harborline was profitable enough to attract sharks, but small enough to elude certain regulations. The owners were hidden in a trust with a seashell name. "They're not afraid of you," Shashi said. "They're afraid of daylight." "Good," Evan said. "Let's bring morning." He pitched Maya a piece, the math of the micro bridge, how $200 becomes $1,200 and a set of handcuffs. She built it with charts and interviews and a calm that made the predation look exactly as ordinary as it is. Harborline responded with a legal letter that threatened damage claims and spelled her name wrong again. Blocks and Bridges printed the letter. Readers bought the misspelling t-shirt in new colors. "Why do they keep messing up my name?" Maya asked, half laughing, half tired. "Because getting names right is work," Evan said, "and they don't know how to work." He didn't see the other email until midnight. It had slipped into a folder with coupons. The subject line read, "You don't know me. I work at Pike. Don't write back. Read this." The body contained scans of a profit-sharing plan drafted by Lafton's cousin 7 years back, almost word for word the plan that had stolen from Evan. At the bottom of one page, a handwritten note, "Standard doc works great. NDAs keep the peace." The scrawl matched an old signature Evan had memorized like a scar. He printed the scans and sat with them on the floor. The smell of gypsum came back as clean as if someone had unrolled the years like a tarp. He felt the old heat, and then, like water hitting metal, the hiss of resolve. Teeth, he said aloud to the empty room. Blessings with teeth. They were going to find him eventually. Vanity and vigilance can only dance for so long before they step on each other's feet. A photographer at the gala had posted a slideshow on her website. Candid shots of donors caught mid-laugh, mid-toast, mid-consolation. There was Evan, no name, just Quarry Street Foundation on the caption. Garner's comms kid clicked 3 times, zoomed twice, and recognized him from a worker grievance list that had crossed her desk years back. Rios, Evan, foreman, refused NDA. Got him, she told her boss. Who is he? Garner asked. Used to work for Pike, she said. Got loud, didn't sign, now he's got money. From where? Garner asked. Lottery winner, the comms kid guessed, because that's the fairy tale people tell when the math doesn't add up. Garner texted Leonard, Quarry guy is ex-foreman, you canned. Evan Rios, Leonard wrote back, never heard of him. A minute later, actually rings a bell, stubborn. Another beat, find out what he wants. What Evan wanted was to stay unfindable long enough to finish the table he was building. Jules noticed his shoulders riding closer to his ears. You need a decoy, Jules said, a program officer who looks good in a jacket. Who? Evan asked. Hire one, Jules said. Real, not just a front, someone who knows grants and can sit with church treasurers and not look like they're speaking Martian. They put out feelers through the credit union director, who knew every competent person in a 5-mile radius. She recommended a woman named Asha Red, who had run after-school programs until a mayor decided after-school didn't poll. Asha interviewed them more than they interviewed her. What's your theory of change? She asked, sitting in the anchor's office, eyeing the jar for Maya's coffee. And don't say the word empower unless you want me to leave. We fund things that are already working and starve things that are predatory, Evan said. We don't take credit. We don't call press conferences. We make sure the people who do the work can keep doing it without learning a new software every fiscal year. Asha nodded. What happens when the city tries to hug you to death? She asked. We wear thorns, Evan said. She smiled. I can start Monday. Asha became the face of Quarry Street in rooms where faces mattered. She kept ledgers like they were holy, moved money like a school crossing guard, and had a talent for saying no in a way that made the asker feel like they'd been done a favor. If someone asked about the donor, she said, old union guy, doesn't like microphones. It was close enough to truth to pass inspection. Maya, for her part, kept showing up. She filmed Naya counseling a trainee through a bad bead and caught a moment where Mrs. Ortiz scolded a council staffer for cutting the pantry line to hand out flyers. Her camera made people behave slightly better for 30 seconds. Sometimes that's all you need. Evan took to walking home the long way, watching reflections in storefronts, counting steps, recounting. He wasn't paranoid. He was awake. One night, a car idled too long on the corner. Another night, a man he didn't recognize held the building's lobby door for him and watched his key touch the lock. When he got upstairs, there was a plain envelope under his door. Inside, a printout of the gala photo with a circle around his face and a sticky note, "You don't get to hide forever. See." He turned the note over, nothing on the back. The handwriting was careful, the kind of precise that grows up in prep schools. Camden. Evan stared until the circle felt like a hula hoop around his chest. Then he tore the sticky note in half and slid the pieces into 2 different trash cans. When he looked up, his mother's photo on the bookshelf seemed to tilt, the way pictures do when a truck passes. I know, he said. We'll fix the tilt. They filed in county court under a name that sounded like a heavy door. Pike & Sons Construction v. John Doe's 120, Quarry Street Foundation, Blocks and Bridges Media et al. Claims: defamation, tortious interference, civil conspiracy. Remedies sought: damages, injunctions, an apology written in blood. That part wasn't in the filing, but it was the music the words played. The first hearing was crowded with people who didn't understand civil procedure, but did understand which way their paychecks flowed. On one side, men in suits padded with precedent. On the other, Maya in a jacket she called courtroom neutral. Asha with a folder of receipts, a cluster of workers whose day off cost them a day's food. Evan sat in the back row and looked like a man who had come for the air conditioning. Pike's lawyer gestured a lot. He said phrases like reckless disregard for the truth and malicious intent and trial by media. He smiled at the judge with the smile of a man who sends bottles on holidays. The judge, who had the weary patience of someone who had once loved rules, asked for the specific statements Pike claimed were false. The lawyer pointed to Maya's headline, to her sentence that said unpaid wages, to Block and Bridge's video where Luis described paperwork walls. He argued that Pike paid everyone when properly documented. Maya's counsel, two lawyers from a nonprofit who carried their own pens, asked whether properly documented meant after NDAs. The courtroom, a room designed to be impartial, made a small sound that wasn't. The judge declined to issue an injunction against Maya's reporting. "We don't gag facts," she said. She scheduled a hearing for discovery. Pike's lawyer tried a different tack. He asked for Quarry Street's donor list. Asha stood. "We are a private foundation with no statutory requirement to disclose donor identity," she said calmly. "We will, however, disclose every grant we've made, every dollar in and out. We'll even color code for you." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Color coding is not required," she said, but her mouth twitched. Outside on the steps, a small crowd had gathered, not because they understood exactly what was at stake, but because they knew something was moving, and they wanted to stand near the motion. A man in a polo asked Maya if she was scared. She said, "My job is to be interesting, not brave." Evan watched her lie like a professional. That evening, an email hit Quarry Street's inbox from a firm with a nice logo offering to defend them pro bono. The signature, Carson and Bell, First Amendment practice. Shashi had apparently been busy while Evan slept. She'd sent feelers to friends who liked to punch bullies with paper. "Take it," Asha said. "We're going to spend enough fighting everyone else." "What about me?" Maya asked later over takeout in the anchor's classroom. "Am I one of the does?" "You're the definite article," Evan said. "Don't get poetic on me," she said. "It makes it hard to be mad at you." "Are you mad?" he asked. "I'm mad that they think they can scare us silent," she said. "I'm mad that the first 10 calls I got were from people asking if I planned to tone it down. I'm mad that my ad revenue went up and my sleep went down. I'm not mad at you." "That's a relief," Evan said. "Don't get used to it," she said, and stole his spring roll. The city clerk's office did not love them. It was hard to love a flood, even when it was natural. Evan had spent a Sunday drafting FOIA requests that read like a map. Emails between Garner's office and Pike, permits for Harborline sponsorships, calendar entries for listening sessions, OSHA communications logged with city inspectors, and anything containing the phrases, "keep it quiet," "heads up," or "friendly call." Shashi walked them over in person with a box of donuts. Charm moves paper. What came back, 2 weeks later, was enough to cover a small wall. Much of it was blacked out like the city had gotten into blackout poetry, but the residue told a story. There was an email from Garner's deputy thanking a Pike operations manager for tickets, amazing seats. There were calendar entries for boat days labeled constituent outreach. There was a memo from a planner warning against accelerated permit consideration, and a handwritten note beside it, "Make it go." Maya built the piece with a quiet that made readers lean in. She didn't overheat it. She didn't have to. She embedded the documents, annotated the margins, and wrote a paragraph so compact it felt heavier than it looked. If you wonder why your kid's school roof still leaks, follow the emails that call a boat day outreach. Garner called it a coordinated smear. He promised an internal review. He looked into the camera the way men look into mirrors. The council scheduled an ethics hearing that had no teeth but lots of lights. People came anyway. A retired teacher read 3 sentences and then held up her inhaler. Luis told the trench story again and pointed to his calf. The credit union director explained APR caps like a bedtime story for people who had never been tucked in. Leonard sent a man with cufflinks to sit behind him and whisper. Camden took notes with a pen that cost more than a day's labor. When someone mentioned Harborline, he widened his eyes like the word were a coincidence. Evan sat in the back and counted breaths. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't know. Look at the tower site. Now. He slipped out and walked the 4 blocks to the red-bannered project. Work had resumed in a limited way, like a man on crutches trying to look casual. A gust picked up dust and blew it into a group of passersby. One of them coughed so hard they bent double. He took out his phone and filmed. He sent the clip to Maya. Caption: "Friends don't let friends call this compliance." She posted it. The permit office called the site manager. The site manager called someone who called someone who called the inspector with a clipboard. The banner came down again. The crutches slipped. That night, Mrs. Ortiz texted a photo of the pantry line, shorter than usual. Credit union line, longer. Then a second photo, a room at the Anchor where a half-dozen trainees studied for OSHA 10. Luis pacing the back with a grin. "Teeth," she wrote. The attack wasn't smart. Smarter men had failed to undo movements made of casseroles and stubbornness. They came at night, 3 of them, judging by the camera 4 the Anchor had installed above the bay door. Hoodies, quick steps, a can of something pressurized. They didn't try the lock. They tried the wall. In the morning, words bloomed across corrugated steel in fat black letters. Rats feed rats, and below it, a crude drawing of a hook catching a fish. The fish had a $sign for an eye. Jules stood in front of it, arms crossed. Naya squinted like she was reading a bad menu. The trainees clustered, unsure if they were supposed to look or pretend not to see. Maya filmed without commentary. Evan felt a heat rise that he recognized and counted to 10 with it. Then he took out his phone and called a number he had been saving for joy. "Hey," he said when Mrs. Ortiz answered. "We need paint and grandkids." The pantry closed early that day. Grandkids arrived with brushes and a fidelity to color the brands would envy. Naya sketched a rough outline on butcher paper and taped it up, 2 hands welding a seam that turned into a bridge, a flock of small birds carrying bits of ribbon like tributaries. The words that went up weren't new. They were the ones they already used. Bolt it to the floor. Pay on time for oxygen. We teach each other. Someone added Maya's fuel fund as a little coffee cup in the corner. Someone else painted a bowl of caldo on the bottom right. Luis painted a trench with shoring, so textbook it could have been assigned. It took 3 hours. The sun did what it does when people decide to be outside together. Cars slowed, a news van idled. The councilman's staffer walked by twice and pretended to check a parking meter. By dusk, the wall looked like a story you could read at 10 miles an hour. Asha stenciled the Anchor in the top left. She works in thin letters with the seriousness of a ledger. Maya went live. When someone calls you a rat, build a kitchen. The video climbed. Comments stacked. The training center's phone rang, a woman from a neighborhood 2 bus rides away asking if they were taking more students. A man with a son who had failed algebra twice but could take apart a toaster in 3 minutes asked whether there were age restrictions. A nurse from the senior center asked if they fixed elevators. The senior center elevator had been on his light list since he started the lists. He'd been waiting for a predictable obstruction. The vandalism was their gift, an excuse to move faster without looking reckless. He called Shashi. "Find me the RFP calendar for city facilities," he said. "I want maintenance contracts coming up for renewal." "Already in your inbox," she said, a smile audible. "Senior center elevator is bundled with HVAC maintenance due next month. Pike's got the current contract through a subsidiary." "Then we make a bid," he said. "You're not a GC," she said. "I'm not," he said, "but the Anchor Works Cooperative can be." They spent a week doing the unglamorous work of forming a worker-owned LLC, with Asha writing the bylaws like gospel. 1 worker, 1 vote, profit distribution formula, mandatory reserve for slow months, a clause about safety that read like commandment. They partnered with a small elevator service firm, tired of being squeezed by Pike's subsidiary, and with a union local that liked the idea of apprentices with a spine. Maya wanted to write about it. Evan said not yet. He wanted the bid to land without a spotlight. He wanted to win on math. When the bid went in, it was sober and mean. A fair price, a maintenance schedule that imagined aging, a penalty clause if residents had to use the stairs for more than a day, and a list of training hours for trainees assigned to the contract. It wasn't flashy. It looked like someone loved the people who would ride. Garner's office called the procurement director and asked about new entrants. The procurement director, tired of boat days, said lowest responsible bidder wins. 2 weeks later, the award letter arrived. The Anchor Works Cooperative would fix the elevator, maintain it for 3 years, and handle minor HVAC issues with Damien's team on call. Jules taped the letter next to the mural and underlined the word responsible 3 times. Pike's subsidiary filed an objection. The procurement office declined with a paragraph Evan memorized for rainy days. The awarded bidder demonstrated capacity, offered superior safety provisions, and presented a comprehensive plan for continuity. They scheduled the fix for a Tuesday. That morning, trainees gathered in new coveralls, hair tucked and boots tight. The senior center director cried in the lobby. A woman in a pink sweater told Naya she hadn't been downstairs in 2 months. Naya promised she'd be riding by noon. At 11:48, the elevator doors slid open and the car lowered like a hand offering help. The woman in pink clapped. Someone shouted hallelujah without irony. Evan stepped back and watched the doors close on a room full of people who had chosen not to be grateful to the wrong men. On the way out, a man with a banker's tan and a tie the color of a bruise approached him, all friendly. "You're making waves," he said. "I represent National Fidelity. We hold certain notes related to Pike's properties. Thought you might want to talk." "Why would I want to talk to you?" Evan asked, cautious. "Because sometimes tides change," the man said. He handed Evan a card. On the back, in blue ink, "Headquarters mortgage matures in 7 months. Covenants brittle." Evan looked at the brick box that housed Pike's flagship office. He didn't see walls. He saw paper. "Blessings with teeth," he whispered, and slid the card into his pocket. The banker's card sat on Evan's desk like a dare. "Headquarters mortgage matures in 7 months. Covenants brittle." He called Shashi. "Banker said the mortgage is brittle," he told her. She chuckled. "Mortgages are bricks until you look close, then they're paper walls." 2 days later, she had the file. Pike's flagship office, 3 stories of smug brick and glass, was mortgaged to National Fidelity. The loan had covenants requiring minimum cash reserves and timely tax filings. Pike had both, technically, but the filings showed late stamps and the reserves smelled of Harborline laundering. "If their reserves dip, the bank can call the loan," Shashi said. "And with interest rates like this, refinancing won't be pretty." "What happens if they default?" Evan asked. "They lose their office," she said simply, "or they sell something to cover it." He pictured Leonard Pike, cufflinks gleaming, watching movers carry his nameplate out the door. Not enough. He pictured the building sold at auction and the Anchor Works bidding as a joke. But maybe not a joke. "Can we push the reserves down?" Evan asked. "We can highlight what's already true," Shashi said. "They've been floating subcontractor payments by 30 days. That's a liability if you squint." "Squint harder," Evan said. Word travels. The Anchor's trainees heard chatter from cousins and uncles still on Pike sites. Rumors that Pike wasn't paying vendors on time. Whispers of layoffs for efficiency. Luis told Evan, "Guys are getting paid late, man. Checks bouncing like basketballs." Maya filmed interviews with faces shadowed about delays, about being told to be patient. She ended with a quote from a worker, "Patience doesn't feed my daughter." Pike's PR team fired back with a glossy video of Leonard shaking hands on a job site, talking about family values. The comments section turned into a bonfire. Meanwhile, Mrs. Ortiz noticed something curious. Quickfin had closed one of its branches. A paper sign read "Consolidating for Efficiency." She texted Evan a photo. Wolf down 1 tooth. At the pantry that week, volunteers wore t-shirts stenciled with "Blessings have teeth." It was bound to happen. Camden Lafton showing up in person. He came to the Anchor in a suit that didn't know what grease smelled like. He smiled at the mural, as if inspecting graffiti that had pretensions. "You must be Mr. Rios," he said when Evan met him in the bay. "Depends who's asking," Evan said. "I'm here on behalf of Pike and Sons," Camden said. "We've noticed your activities." Feeding people, training workers, disrupting markets, destabilizing partnerships, inciting lawsuits. Funny, Evan said. I thought I was just bolting things to the floor. Camden's smile tightened. You're playing a dangerous game with people who have more resources than you can imagine. Resources don't scare me, Evan said. Unpaid wages do. Camden leaned in. You're not untouchable. That lottery ticket won't protect you. Evan's eyes narrowed. Funny, I never told anyone about the ticket. For the first time, Camden blinked. Small city, he said smoothly. Rumors. But Evan saw the tell. Someone had dug, and Camden wanted him rattled. Instead, it made him sharper. Goodbye, Mr. Lofton, Evan said, and walked him out. The trainees, watching from the bays, saw Camden leave looking smaller than when he'd entered. The elevator contract at the senior center became a symbol. Local news filmed the ribbon, cut not by Garner, but by an 80-year-old woman who lived on the top floor. The clip went mildly viral. Requests poured in. HVAC at a daycare, a roof repair at a library, sidewalk shoring outside a clinic. The Anchor Works Cooperative had more demand than capacity. Careful, Asha warned. Grow too fast and we break. Grow steady, Jules countered. Words are fuel. They compromised. Only contracts that touched community spaces, schools, clinics, housing, centers. Nothing glossy, nothing meant for ribbon chasing. Pike's grip slipped. When a subcontractor asked why he should keep waiting on checks, he got told, Anchor Works is hiring. Evan heard the tide shifting in the voices around him. It wasn't joy, it was gravity. Maya uncovered emails showing Garner's staff leaning on procurement officers to consider continuity when awarding bids. She published them with a headline, Continuity for whom? Garner called her reckless. She replied on camera, Transparency isn't reckless, it's responsible. Quarry Street's lawyer filed an amicus brief supporting the workers' class action. Legal aid attorneys joked they'd never seen filings so neatly tabbed. The pressure built. Workers picketed a Pike site, not with chants but with silence, holding pay stubs with blank spaces where hours should have been. TV crews loved it. Leonard went on television, veins popping, insisting Pike was family. The anchor asked, Why are so many of your family members suing you? The bank blinked. National Fidelity issued a notice of covenant breach. Pike's reserves had dipped below threshold. 30 days to cure or refinance. Shashi showed Evan the letter. This is it. They'll scramble, Evan said. Sell something. Or lose the office. Maya wanted to publish immediately, but Evan held her back. Let them sweat. Then we decide where to shine the light. Meanwhile, Leonard called a meeting of key allies, contractors, lenders, council staff. Someone leaked the invite. Maya ran the headline, Emergency Brunch at Pike's, eggs served with panic. Camden called again, voice tight, You're ruining livelihoods. No, Evan said, you did. I'm just turning the lights on. One night, alone in his apartment, Evan pulled out his 2 lists, light and glass. The light list had grown. The pantry, the credit union, the Anchor Works, the senior center. Each name felt heavier, more real. The glass list had fewer names than before. Some had already cracked. Others waited. He thought of his mother's photo tucked behind the ticket. He thought of the day he'd stood in Pike's office, hearing tides as an excuse for theft. Now the tide was turning, slow but sure. He whispered to himself, not joy, justice. And for the first time, the word didn't hiss, it rang. The first crack in Pike's armor didn't come from a lawsuit or a bid. It came from inside. An anonymous package landed at the Anchor's mailbox. Invoices, payroll logs, and a USB stick. On it, a video, a Pike site supervisor shouting at workers to sign the damn waiver or go home. The waiver, an NDA, illegal, unenforceable, swearing they wouldn't talk about dust exposure. Maya posted stills from the video, blurred faces, captioned, This is how you keep lungs quiet. The city couldn't ignore it. OSHA launched another surprise inspection. A week later, a fine landed, 6 figures. For Pike, survivable but visible. Garner went silent. Camden called it a misunderstanding. Leonard raged on the radio. At the pantry, Mrs. Ortiz said, Blessings with teeth are working. Not literal fire, though some nights Evan expected that too. Instead, harassment. Flyers accusing Quarry Street of foreign influence. Rumors that the anchor was a union front. Anonymous calls to Maya at midnight. Traitor, liar, rat. She answered one live on stream. If you've got the courage, say your name. Otherwise, you're just static. Then she hung up and kept filming trainees learning to cut pipe. The harassment backfired. Donations spiked for blocks and bridges. The mural on the anchor's wall sprouted new graffiti overnight. We are not static. Still, Evan noticed his sleep shrinking. Shadows felt heavier. When a car followed him 3 blocks one evening, he ducked into a bodega and waited it out. His pulse didn't slow for an hour. National Fidelity called a meeting. Shashi went as Quarry Street's consultant. The bankers, 2 suits with cufflinks like mirrors, explained they were concerned about Pike's capacity. They floated the idea of restructuring if an outside guarantor stepped in. You mean us, Shashi said flatly. Quarry Street is liquid, the banker said. Shashi smiled like a scalpel. We don't guarantee predators, but we do buy property. 2 weeks later, Evan learned the Anchor Works Cooperative had been invited to view Pike's headquarters in case of foreclosure. Not yet, but the tide was close. He walked past the building at dusk. Its glass reflected the sky, but he imagined it hollow. The Urban Renewal Initiative hosted another gala. This time, Pike's name was absent from the sponsorship list. Asha insisted Quarry Street decline. No need to gloat, she said. But Maya went, credentialed as press. She filmed Garner weaving through tables, shaking hands that looked tired. Leonard wasn't there. Camden was, jaw tight, scanning the room like he expected ghosts. Maya caught a moment, Camden whispering urgently into Garner's ear. She zoomed. The caption later, family ties don't untangle easy. The clip spread. People who'd once shrugged at construction politics started paying attention. The senior center elevator held strong. The daycare roof stopped leaking. The library HVAC purred. Residents wrote letters not to Pike but to the Anchor Works. One said simply, "You fixed what they said was too expensive. Thank you." Evan taped it to the office wall. Trainees graduated. Naya got hired full-time by the union. Damien landed 3 contracts. Luis became a trainer himself. The light list grew again. At a graduation cookout, Mrs. Ortiz raised a cup. "You can't eat glass," she said, "but you can build with it." Desperation has a smell. Paper burned at the edges. Pike slashed bids, undercutting themselves just to win contracts. Vendors fled, subcontractors defected, workers demanded checks in cash. Leonard appeared on TV flanked by 2 pastors, claiming persecution. One pastor looked uncomfortable. The other smiled like a hired suit. Camden tried a softer route, reaching out through intermediaries. Settle, quietly, walk away rich, everyone wins. Evan didn't respond. Silence was sharper than no. Late one night, Evan opened his safe. The ticket was still there behind his mother's photo. Untouched, unnecessary, yet the seed of everything. He stared at it a long time. Winning had been accident. What mattered now wasn't luck, it was leverage. It was turning paper into weight. His mother's eyes in the photo seemed to ask the same question he'd been circling. When do you stop? He folded the list of light and set it beside her picture. The glass list remained on the desk, fewer names now. He whispered, "Not yet." The tide wasn't finished turning. National Fidelity made the move. They issued a notice of default. Pike had 30 days to pay down millions or lose their headquarters. Maya broke the story before Pike could spin it. Her headline, "The house built on unpaid wages is crumbling." Within hours, vendors demanded cash. Subcontractors walked. A half-finished Pike tower sat frozen in the skyline like a broken tooth. Leonard tried fury on TV, shouting about witch hunts and jealous enemies. Camden tried calm, promising restructuring. Neither landed. For the first time, the Pike name didn't make people step back. It made them step closer, curious to watch a giant fall. Councilman Garner called an emergency press conference. He stood in front of City Hall with an American flag so large it looked rented. He claimed Quarry Street was an outside agitator, destabilizing jobs. He called Maya biased. He waved papers, letters of support from developers who had already hedged their bets. When reporters asked if he'd taken gifts from Pike, he stumbled. Every council member engages in outreach. The clip ran on loop, his eyes darting, his words fumbling. Outreach had never sounded so guilty. By week's end, the ethics committee voted to censor him. Symbolic but public. The bank set a date. Pike's headquarters would be auctioned. Evan, Asha, and Shashi sat in a bland conference room with fluorescent lights. Opposite them, men in suits, some sniffing opportunity, others sent to salvage. When the bidding opened, numbers flew. Then Pike's subsidiary tried a desperate play, overbidding with money they didn't have. Shashi whispered, "They can't cover that." Sure enough, the bank rejected the bid. Silence followed. Evan raised his card. The Anchorworks Cooperative bid, steady, not flashy. The gavel fell. Outside, Maya caught the moment on camera. Workers from the Anchor standing in front of a building once untouchable. Her caption, "The tide belongs to everyone now." The class action suit reached court. Dozens of workers testified. Unpaid hours, NDAs, threats. Luis stood tall, scar visible, and said, "We don't want charity. We want checks that clear." The judge listened. The jury deliberated. The verdict, Pike liable for wage theft, punitive damages in the millions. When the ruling was read, workers hugged in the gallery. Maya streamed it live. Leonard wasn't there. Camden was, face pale, jaw clenched. Evan watched from the back, expression quiet. This was what a ledger looked like when it finally balanced. Leonard fled to his golf course compound, refusing interviews. A week later, he retired, citing health reasons. Rumors swirled. Offshore accounts, investigations, silent partners cutting ties. His empire shrank to a whisper. At the pantry, Mrs. Ortiz served caldo and said men like him think they own time, but time never signed their contract. Evan didn't celebrate. He marked a name off the glass list and left it blank. The Anchor's new building, once Pike's headquarters, was stripped of its brass plaques and renamed simply The Table. Inside, classrooms, co-op offices, a daycare, a hall where community groups could meet without rent. On the wall, the mural recreated larger, brighter. At the dedication, there was no podium, just folding chairs around long tables. People ate, talked, laughed. Evan sat at the edge, watching. Jules leaned over. "You built it." "We built it," Evan corrected. Maya filmed the room, her voice soft. Sometimes vengeance is just another word for repair. That night, alone in his apartment, Evan opened the safe. The ticket still lay behind his mother's photo, untouched since the day he'd claimed it. He held it once, then slid it back. The lists lay beside him, light, long and heavy, glass, nearly empty. He picked up a pen. On the glass sheet, he wrote one final word, "Done." For the first time in years, he let himself breathe without counting. It wasn't joy, it wasn't vengeance. It was peace. The kind that tastes like balance. 5 years later, Quarry Street was still a shortcut to nowhere, but the name meant something. The table bustled daily. Welders in training clanged metal upstairs, a daycare buzzed with crayons and lullabies, and in the evenings a church group met in the hall without needing to pass a collection plate for rent. The mural out front had grown with additions. New birds, new slogans, new hands holding tools. Maya's little outlet, Blocks and Bridges, had become a fixture citywide. Her camera was still stubborn, still catching the 30-second truths that bigger networks ignored. Her misspelled t-shirt hung framed in her office, a private joke and a public vow. Mrs. Ortiz's pantry had a waiting list, not for food, but for volunteer shifts. People wanted to work there, to be part of the teeth and the blessing. And the Anchorworks Cooperative, it had contracts across the city, schools, clinics, senior centers. Workers owned it, workers voted, paychecks cleared. No one signed NDAs for oxygen. Evan Rios kept no office. He taught sometimes safety classes, mostly quiet, exact. He walked the neighborhoods in the evenings, watching buildings breathe. The list still sat in a drawer at home. Light had outgrown paper, glass was folded, sealed, done. One night he pulled out his wallet. The lottery ticket, edges yellowing, still rested behind his mother's photo. He looked at it a long time. Then gently he slid the ticket out, set it on the kitchen counter, and struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, vanished. His mother's face remained, smiling from the photograph. He whispered, "Not tides, tables." And in the quiet after, he felt no rage, no weight, only balance, like a floor finally level.